The Texans return to that turf that's in New Jersey and hope to come away with a victory. We're going to talk about all that and more on this edition of the Bullpen.
To throw the punches away. He floats one wide open, and there he goes. Tapped down for a Texan touchdown.
Hello and welcome to the Bullpen. I am James Roy, and as always with me is Tom Chavarria. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm excited, man. Prime time, Texan football. We don't get enough. We're getting it now. This is going to start, some of our different time slot football. I'm pretty jacked about it. I think anytime the team gets national praise, I'm here for it. I just need them to perform.
Yeah, and I never thought I'd say this, but Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback of the Jets now, and I feel a little better about the matchup than I did when it was Zach Wilson. That's mainly because looking ahead to the weather, it doesn't seem to be like it's going to be the same kind of game in that way. So that's mainly what I'm going on. But also the Jets have been quite awful with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. So we'll see how that goes. The Texans secondary is at full strength right now, so that's something we can hang our hats on. It's a spooky season primetime game with Halloween being the exact date that this happens, right? It's on the 31st? All right. So with that, are you going to be wearing a costume and going trick-or-treating with your kids, or are you going to be watching the game? Like, what is it?
Posted up watching football, baby. They understand that ball is life.
Football is life. I mean, I don't know yet. We'll see. I'll definitely be paying attention to the game, but I don't know. I don't know what that has for me. That's the big thing for me. But we'll see. We already kind of talked about Aaron Rodgers. He's healthy to this point, which has been a huge talking point for us throughout the offseason on how this game would go. With the hindsight of the first 8 weeks of the season in the rearview mirror, how do you feel going into this matchup with the Jets?
I feel better than I did when the season started. I mean, obviously, you look at where you thought the Texans would be at this point. I think most people had them about 6-2. So the fact that they got to that point and didn't underperform, like you look at teams like Cincinnati, you look at teams like Baltimore. These are teams that, going into the season, a lot of people nationally thought that they would be really good, top of the AFC. Now it's like you look up, there's really Kansas City out in front, and that's about it. So for the Texans to be in a spot where they get to be showcased, I feel like, on national TV because they're clearly the class of this game. The Jets have been absolutely awful. It's kind of exciting.
Yeah, and I think that going into the season, there was probably equal parts of the weight to be carried on making this a primetime game. There was quite a few pundits in the national media that thought the Jets were like the one seed in the AFC East, which granted, the AFC East is looking a lot weaker than it really ever has, all things considered. But with that, it's nice to see that at this point, the Texans are really the draw of this primetime game. I actually got Amazon Prime, so I will be able to watch this game, which expresses one of my frustrations with primetime TV. But it's nice. It's nice to be noticed on a national level. Now, to speak to this Texans offense, C.J. Stroud has recently had a lot of trouble, and I know we've mostly blamed that on the offensive line, offensive scheming. Going back to this could be like a bit of a PTSD thing for CJ, depending on how it goes. But this is the location where his MVP hopes last season kind of came to an abrupt end. He suffered a concussion, 2 games down, almost cost the Texans playoffs, honestly, if we're being real. How do you think CJ feels going into this with the context of this season and with the context of how it went last season?
I got to believe CJ, the competitor, is absolutely fired up to right this wrong. Last year, he was sky high and then went into a horrible condition in the Meadowlands, just weather bad, field condition bad. He struggled. Worst game of his career. I think now I think if it's me, I've got that circled. I want to go back in there and I want to prove that, hey, I'm better than that, you know? So for me, CJ's probably going to ball out. That's the way I see it.
It's the ultimate get right game. And if we look at last season, one of the big things that's changed since then that I know quite a few people will be talking about is the fact that Robert Saleh is no longer the head coach of the Jets. So with that, that was the big concern last season. The Jets were really bad, and we weren't really concerned about their offense. And I mean, Zach Wilson still went on to throw for 300 yards, but that's neither here nor there. But the big concern was the Jets' defense. And so with that being less of a concern, I'm more worried about the Texans or the Jets offense getting right. But as far as the defense goes, I think this could be a good game for CJ to kind of find himself. It's just a matter of if the offense makes the right adjustments this week. It's a short week, so what can you do? And that kind of brings me to the next discussion point, which is that the offensive line has also kind of been neither here nor there. And Quinnen Williams, this Jets defense is not a slouch. They had Hassan Reddick return from his holdout. So this will be a tough group to block against. Do you foresee the Texans trotting Kenyon Green out there? Because I'm going to go ahead and assume that Jarrett Patterson has a concussion. Or not that he has it, but that's going to keep him out due to the shortness of the turnaround this week. Do you foresee them putting Kenyon Green back out there? What are your thoughts on that situation in general going into this Jets game?
Again, like I said on the post game for last week, the fact that Kendrick Green's name has not been called to this point means that he is absolutely not performed in front of the eyes of D'Amico Ryans and Bobby Slowick and Nick Casario for them to feel like he is an improvement over Kenyon Green. And to me, that's I don't know what more you can hope for. Everybody saw him last year and go, "Oh, well, this guy's good, you know, like we can play him." But if the brain trust doesn't feel that way, I can't force that. So I have to go with what they're showing me. The fact that they went right back to Kenyon Green after Jerry Patterson went out means he's probably going to start. Now, are they afraid to bench him? Absolutely not. Could we see Kendrick Green if he falters again? Absolutely. I think they're really hoping for something for this kid to click, because at this point, if he doesn't figure it out this season, he's probably on a bus somewhere else.
Yeah, I can't imagine the Texans keeping him past this season. I feel like this is like kind of a tour of his last several chances to get right. And if he doesn't, I could foresee the need for a guard to become a high level need for this Texans team. So interested to see how that plays out. Looking at the wide receiver room, we at time of recording don't really know how serious the Stephon Diggs injury is, but what do you think we can expect against a group that features Sauce Gardner as a pretty solid defensive group in the secondary as well? How do you think the wide receivers and tight end group will do? And how do you think that Bobby Slowick might try and adjust, if he understands the definition of the word, to this Jets defense going into New York?
I don't know, but I hope he does. I mean, I feel like this is more of a key component as to why the Texans aren't performing optimally like people want them to be. I know that you don't feel like they've scored enough or done enough on offense, but they averaged 23 and a half points. So I told you when the season started, they would average 23 and a half points per game. You probably don't hate that number.
I wouldn't hate that number if it didn't look so bad. This is once again a difference between statistics and the eye test, and the eye test shows that this offense is performing at a lesser level than the statistics are showing, which is fine. The only statistic that matters, as much as you might think I don't believe this based off how I talk about it, is the win column, and the Texans this season are 6-2, so I'm not like entirely out on them, but man, there could be a lot better drives put together by this Texans offense. Obviously, I don't think anyone is doubting that this Texans offense could be performing a lot better than it is just from what we're seeing on the field. But with that in mind, we could talk about the run game, and I guess we could do that. How do you feel about Joe Mixon going into this game? He over his past 4 games has gotten at least 100 yards, at least a touchdown. He's tearing it up. Do you think that continues against this Jets defense, or do you foresee the Jets being able to bring that to a stop?
I mean, the Jets are giving up 125 yards a game. So I hope that they don't stop them. I think the Texans will only go as far as Joe Mixon will carry them right now. Regardless of what we think about the offense, Joe Mixon has rushed for 100 yards every game that he's started and finished. So for me, that's like if you get that off rip, it makes everything else easier. So he's huge for me.
100%. 100%. Let's look at the defensive side of the ball. So Aaron Rodgers and this offense have not exactly functioned at the level you would want to, you'd want to see. This is part of one of those things that's happened in fantasy football in my Dynasty Fantasy Football League where wide receivers that I've traded this year have gone on to be put in awful situations or get injured. I traded T. Higgins. He gets injured. And then in this case, I traded Garrett Wilson. Don't worry, I got Jamar Chase back in that trade. But I traded Garrett Wilson, and immediately Devontae Adams shows up in New York. Man, what an awful situation to put your young stud superstar receiver in, to just bring in your friend Devontae, who is also a star wide receiver. And I feel bad for Devontae Adams going to a 2-6 team after being on a 2-6 team, or I guess it was 2-5 at the time. But how do you feel about this Texans defense? Likely Toa returns. The secondary looks pretty good. Maybe we'll see Christian Harris or Jeff Okudah come back this week. How do we feel going into this game against the Jets in New York?
I do worry about the wide receiver matchups. I think for me, you saw them lean on Garrett Wilson in the New England game. He had 8 targets for 113 yards. Who matches up where? Does D'Amico Ryans just say, okay, we're gonna line them up and see what happens? Devontae Adams, he was 4 for 6 for 54 yards. Does he finally get it going? To me, that's the biggest thing that I think separates whether the Jets can be good or not is if they can unlock that passing game. Breece Hall's been pretty good all season long. He was 16 carries, 80 yards. I think that's respectable. But it's like being able to turn, 233 yards into 300 yards for Aaron Rodgers probably determines whether or not they're good. And I think if the Texans can slow down that pass game, I think they win much in the same way they have, with Indy and I feel like that Green Bay game they could have won even though, Love was able to throw the ball a little bit. So I love what the defense is doing right now.
I couldn't agree more. I think that obviously Aaron Rodgers' ability to throw is going to be the difference. And I haven't watched a lot of Jets football this season, but it's tough to believe that Aaron Rodgers has played at least okay. I've seen a couple of stat lines where he played okay and the Jets just couldn't pull out a victory. So then what is the issue with the Jets? Where are they bleeding from? Because I haven't watched enough Jets football to know, but I'm interested to see where that's coming from, because if Aaron Rodgers steps in and against the Texans and throws for 300 yards and the Texans still win, I'm like, where is it? And I'll know after watching the game if that happens, how that's going to go. But I'm really interested to see how Breece Hall does against the Texans. This is a Texans team that's done okay against the run this season. Not quite top 5 like they have in the past, but they have played some really good running backs this season. And that was kind of what happened last season, where they shut down a lot of solid running backs, but when they faced like Jonathan Taylor at the end of the season, they kind of crumbled. So I'm interested to see how they do against him. And like you said, I'm interested to see how the secondary matches up. It truly will be just line up and play football like D'Amico says. Like, I don't think that you shadow one receiver with Derek Stingley. It's just kind of like whoever's where, and it'll really be a test for Kalen Bullock and Kamari Laster. Looking at how this game's going to go, I think it's about time that we give our score predictions. So, Tom, how are you feeling about this game? I last or 2 weeks ago, you gave the first and only score prediction against the Texans between the two of us. Last week we both were, I think we were pretty close. I think I said 24-0, you said 27-0, or 27-20. Sorry, we both got the Colts score right. We just didn't quite get the Texans score right. But how do you feel about this matchup?
Well, I think the Jets are going to be playing for their lives. So, as much as I would like to say the Texans are just going to be able to impose their will on this team, I think it's going to be another close game. I think James and some other people are going to definitely have things to talk about after. Still feel like the Texans get it done. I feel like it's going to be a lower scoring game. So for me, 23-17 is where I'm sitting at. I think right now Vegas has it as like a 1-point favorite for the Texans. I think that balloons a little bit.
Yeah, and I think Vegas watched the games that the Texans have played, and that's why they have it as such a close game. But for me, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm pretty close to. Like, if I'm going for it, I'm probably more down a little bit, maybe like a 20-10, 20-13 kind of thing going on. I'll go 20-13 with the Texans winning. And then to get to the storybook ending, this is going to be one where we've seen John Mechie show flashes and signs of life. I'm going to go ahead and call it right now. John Mechie is going to get his first touchdown in an NFL regular season game. The Texans and the Jets are going to be tied 13-13 going into the final 2 minutes of the game. And CJ Stroud is just going to hit his stride and just start slinging, wheeling, and dealing and get the Texans down the field. And then it's getting close. The Jets still have their timeouts. The Texans are at the 40-yard line. It's a question of, do we just push to get into field goal range, or do we go, really go for it? We'll probably just settle for field goal range, right? And then on the next play, CJ Stroud drops back, and Mechie's just absolutely behind the defense. Like, there's no reason not to hit him with the best ball you've ever thrown in your life. And that's what CJ does. He gets him in stride, and Mechie walks in the end zone, hits the crane, and then Cammy Fairbairn comes on, puts up the extra point, and the Texans walk away with a 20-13 victory over the Jets. So I feel like I'm getting more and more realistic with these final score endings. The only unrealistic part about this is the fact that most teams usually just settle for a field goal in that situation. They just run the clock out and kick it. But I don't like relying on the kicker. I like pushing the ball down the field and trying to see what you can get. So touchdowns are far more certain than field goals. Of course, Kyrie Fairbairn's a pretty certain field goal kicker. So, yeah. Well, Tom, it's happening. We don't want it to, but the Texans are going to New Jersey, and we'll be playing football on Thursday. And I feel like it was just yesterday that we were talking about hating the idea of that, and now here we are returning to that turf that sucks and that we don't like. But, oh well. Criminal that the Texans are going back there in back-to-back seasons, but it's happening. What are your final thoughts on this game before we bring this thing to a close?
I can't stress this enough. I just need them to get out of this game healthy. I would hate a loss. I would absolutely 100% hate a loss. It would hurt. This show would probably not be nearly as fun after a loss. But the only thing that I would hate more than that is CJ to get nicked up again, and we're trying to see what Davis Mills can do for a couple weeks. Tank Dell get hurt. Joe Mixon get hurt. Any of these guys. Need all of them right now. And more important than anything else is just health for me. That's what I'm wishing for the Texans. Health and happiness on Halloween.
I want to have a unique and different point to make from you, but I'm just going to say the exact same words that you just said. All I really want to get out of this game is health. I need the Texans to come away healthy. CJ Stroud, Joe Mixon, tanked out any of them. Can't afford any injuries. Health, happiness, and wholeness, and a happy Halloween. I think I kind of paraphrased my way through saying most of what you said, but just again in my own way. Yeah. All
Like,
right.
I'm so confident. I feel so strongly. If they said tomorrow, hey, we're just going to forfeit. We're starting Davis Mills. We're running out Dare. We're running out everybody else. We just don't even want to mess with this field. People would hate it, but I'd be like, you know what? I'm okay with it. I don't care.
It feels like giving up, and that's like what was it when Chris Godwin got injured last week, right? And the whole immediate discussion around it was like, why was he on the field with 40 seconds left, down 10 points? And I'm like, would you legitimately, as a head coach in the NFL, not have your best wide receiver on the field down 10 points in a game that had 40 seconds left in it? Because if so, I hate to break it to you, probably wouldn't have a job. And I'll tell you this, anyone who was complaining about him being in the game at that point is the exact same people that would be like, hey, why did they pull our best wide receiver from the game? It's a 10-point game with 40 seconds left. That narrative changes based off of that injury. So that is a discussion for another day. But anyways, thanks for tuning into the bullpen. I have been James Roy. You can find me at James Roy NFL on Twitter and at M1TexansFan on Instagram. And with me has been Tom Chavria. Tom is at Third Coast Tom on Twitter and at TCTom1 on Instagram. If you like the hat I'm wearing, it is Fitted Dad on Instagram. And you can't probably get this one, but man, he puts out some pretty good Astros, Texans, all kinds of H-Town stuff. So I'd recommend following him. That's a really good idea. Yeah. As always, stay classy, Houston. And vamos Texans.
Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.